man with broken ribs and a silenced pistol wound in his shoulder was drowning in the rain outside a hospital at 3 in the morning, holding the recording device that would destroy everyone he trusted. The gun in his other hand had jammed at the exact moment it mattered most. Somewhere above him, on the 4th floor, his ex-wife lay in a coma. The woman he'd believed had betrayed him was the only real victim all along. 13 hours earlier, the sound of rain on corrugated metal filled the warehouse studio like white noise. Elias sat on a heavy iron chair, its legs scraping the salt-stained concrete floor. The chair was cold. Everything about the space felt designed to extract confession. The harsh light from the RE650W lamp overhead cast shadows that stretched across the floor like reaching hands. And the thick black XLR cables snaking across the concrete looked like serpents. He adjusted his gray wool blazer, pulling the lapels tight against his ribs, and tried to position his body so the camera wouldn't catch the tremor in his hands. The interviewer sat across from him, nearly invisible in the darkness beyond the lights. Just her silhouette. Just her voice, which came soft and probing like a question that had already decided on its answer. "Are you ready to talk about Sarah?" she asked. Elias reached for the glass of water on the small wooden side table. His hand trembled, causing the glass to rattle against the wood. The sound was audible in the studio. He took a sip, his throat muscles moving visibly as he swallowed. The water was cold and tasted faintly metallic. "Talking doesn't change what she took from me," he said. His voice was gravelly, as though he hadn't used it in months. Maybe he hadn't. Not like this. Not with someone asking him to relive it. He pulled out his phone, iPhone 13, the screen cracked from a drop 6 months ago. He opened the gallery and scrolled past dozens of photos of architectural blueprints. Buildings he'd designed. Buildings that had all been rejected. He found the screenshot he was looking for and held the phone where the camera could see it. The message read, "I'm not coming home, Elias. I'm with Julian. Don't call." The date was June 14th, 2021. That was the last time he'd heard from her. That was the moment his life had bifurcated into before and after. He locked the phone and slid it into his inner blazer pocket. Then he stared directly into the camera lens, his eyes narrowing as the light caught his pupils and threw them back at him like accusations. "You want to know about love after?" he said. His voice had changed. It was colder now, sharpened. "There is no after. There's just aware. Aware that every word was a lie. Aware that you gave someone your architectural blueprints, every weakness, every load-bearing wall, every foundation, and they used them to collapse you." He stood up abruptly. The iron chair screeched backward against the floor, the sound cutting through the ambient hum of the lights. He looked at his watch, a Casio G-Shock with a black band that had faded to gray from years of wear. "I have to go," he said. "Someone's following me." The interviewer didn't respond immediately. In that silence, Elias felt something shift. The woman's posture changed, or maybe it didn't, and he was just paranoid enough to read threat into stillness. He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the warehouse, the rain still thundering on the metal roof. Outside, the rain was biblical. It fell in sheets, soaking through his blazer within seconds, turning the wool from gray to charcoal. The alley behind the warehouse was a river of overflow, puddles reflecting the neon sign across the street that flickered "Reopen" in tired pink light. He walked fast, not quite running, not quite steady. His breathing was shallow. A man in a black oversized hoodie stepped out from behind a dumpster, blocking the exit to the street. "You're talking too much to the cameras, Elias," the man said. His voice was muffled by the fabric of the hoodie, barely audible over the rain. Elias's body responded before his mind caught up. He'd been waiting for this. Some part of him had always known this was coming. The man lunged. He swung a short wooden baton in a wide arc. Elias ducked, his knees bending, his center of gravity dropping. The baton whistled past his ear. He felt the air displacement, hot and furious, and struck the brick wall behind him with a dull thud. Splinters flew from the wood. Elias grabbed the man's forearm. The fabric of his hoodie was slick with rain. Elias pulled, using the man's own momentum, stepping to the side and slamming the man's face into the metal side of the dumpster. The impact was tremendous, a hollow bong that echoed down the alley. The man's groan was animal, instinctive. The dumpster was painted green, but where the man's face had made contact, there was now a bloody smear. The rain immediately began to wash it away, but Elias could see it. Fresh, organic, undeniable. The man dropped the baton. He fumbled in his jacket pocket, searching for something. Elias didn't give him time. He kicked the man's knee, feeling the joint partially give, then delivered a palm strike directly to the man's nose. The angle was precise. The follow-through was complete. The man collapsed into a puddle, clutching his face. Water turned pink around his head. Elias was breathing hard. His knuckles were bleeding. "Who sent you?" Elias shouted over the rain. "Julian?" The man didn't answer. Elias searched his pockets. He found a brown leather wallet. Expensive, thin, European. Inside was no ID. Just a Polaroid photograph of Elias sitting in the studio chair, exactly as he'd been sitting 10 minutes ago. Photographed from behind. The image was dated in faded pen. 7:05 p.m. Elias looked at his Casio G-Shock. 7:47 p.m. The photograph had been taken while he was still being interviewed. He ran. The Volvo was parked 4 blocks away. He'd learned years ago not to park close to anywhere important. He drove with the headlights off for the first 3 miles, the windshield wipers working frantically, clearing nothing. The rain was too heavy. It just came back. When he finally turned on the lights, his hands were shaking so badly he nearly drove into oncoming traffic. He parked in an empty lot behind a closed furniture store and sat there with the doors locked, wiping blood from his knuckles with a white handkerchief he kept in the glove compartment. The handkerchief became dark red, and he threw it onto the passenger seat. He stared at his own reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes were wild, hunted. A faint, high-pitched whine came from the dashboard. Not the sound of the engine. Something else. Something electronic and sustained. Elias leaned in, his ear approaching the air vents. The whine was coming from there. It was too high-pitched to be accidental. It was too intentional. He pulled at the plastic trim around the radio. It snapped off in his hands, the blue plastic cracking. Behind it was a small black plastic box with a blinking red LED. The box was taped with duct tape to the wiring harness. Professional work, sealed, permanent. He ripped the device out and smashed it against the passenger seat with his fist. The plastic cracked. The LED went dark. He noticed a sticker on the back of the device, small white text on black background. Property of Secure Watch Solutions, a security firm. They'd been inside his car. They'd been inside his head. He opened the glove compartment and pulled out a file folder labeled Sarah, Legal. He flipped to the final page. The divorce settlement. There was a notary stamp in purple ink. The name on the stamp was Elena Vance. The date was October 2022. Elena Vance, the woman who'd interviewed him tonight. The woman with the soft, probing voice. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out the business card she'd given him as he'd left the studio. Elena Vance, director. The same name. the notary who had witnessed the end of his marriage, the interviewer who was supposed to give him a platform to heal, the woman who'd asked him if he was ready to talk about Sarah. She wasn't interviewing him. She was watching him. She had been watching him since before the ink on the settlement was dry. Elias drove to the office of Secure Watch Solutions at 8:57 p.m. The building was a 5-story structure in an industrial area, all glass and steel and the kind of clean, modern design that made Elias, an architect, want to vomit. The parking lot was nearly empty. One security guard sat in a booth at the entrance. Elias used a crowbar he kept in the trunk to pry open a side window. He slid inside, landing softly on gray carpet. He held a black Maglite flashlight between his teeth, the bitter metallic taste filling his mouth. He knew building architecture. He'd studied enough of them to understand the bones beneath the skin. He moved with purpose, avoiding the obvious security cameras, sticking to the blind spots where the hallways intersected at the edges of the lens coverage. He found Elena Vance's office on the 3rd floor. The nameplate was polished brass. Elena Vance, Director of Operations. He opened the drawers in her desk. Files, contracts, photographs of other people. Sad people, desperate people. People who looked like they'd had their hearts removed with a spoon and replaced with ash. In the bottom drawer, he found a thick black binder labeled Target, Elias, Case 402M. The binder was full of photographs. Elias eating lunch alone at a restaurant, his face slumped toward his plate. Elias sleeping in his car, his head against the window, exhaustion making him look decades older than he was. Elias crying at a cemetery. That one was dated May 2021, before Sarah had even left. He opened the section labeled Payments. A series of checks, each one signed by Sarah. The signature was elegant, loopy, distinctive. He recognized it from 1,000 love notes written before the end. A check for $25,000. Another for $18,000. Another for $30,000. The total, when he added them in his head, was $150,000. Sarah had paid them to break him, to document his breakdown, to create evidence of his instability for what could only be a custody hearing. But there was no child. There was no custody issue. The divorce settlement had been clean, no dependents, no contested assets. Just separation, just division, just the administrative death of love. He turned the page and found a psychological profile. His psychological profile. Under a section labeled Vulnerabilities, it read, Despair, high need for validation, trust issues, tendency toward isolation, susceptible to narrative building, conspiracy ideation, susceptible to emotional manipulation through authority figures, prone to reactive violence when cornered. They'd studied him like he was a pathology specimen. He found a map of his own house. Several rooms were circled in red. Dots indicated microphone placement locations. There was a red dot in his master bedroom, positioned precisely on the pillow where his head rested each night. Another in his bathroom, above the shower. Another in his kitchen, hidden in a light fixture. His private moments had been public record. He was so focused on the map that he didn't hear the footsteps until they were directly behind him. A flashlight beam hit his face. A guard in a blue uniform stood at the end of the hall, his hand moving toward a taser holster. "Hands up, now," the guard shouted. Elias didn't put his hands up. He threw the heavy binder at the guard's face. The guard dipped, trying to duck, and Elias sprinted forward, tackling him around the waist. They hit the ground together. Papers flew out of the binder like white birds escaping a cage. They rolled on the floor. The guard was bigger, but Elias was faster. The guard landed a punch to Elias's ribs. A good punch, solid, that drove the air out of his lungs. Elias gasped, losing his grip for a moment. The guard reached for his taser, pulling it from the holster. Elias grabbed the guard's wrist, twisting it 180 degrees. The taser fired into the floor, blue sparks jumping across the carpet. Elias drove his forehead into the guard's chin, a brutal headbutt that connected with a crack of bone. The guard's eyes rolled back. His body went limp. Elias scrambled up, clutching his ribs. He grabbed a handful of the scattered papers, the psychological profile, the payment receipts, anything he could carry, and ran toward the fire exit. An alarm began to blare. Red emergency lights strobed in rhythmic pulses. He took the stairs 4 at a time and exploded out onto the street where the rain had finally eased to a drizzle. The night air was cold and it burned in his lungs. At 11 p.m., Elias met Marcus at an abandoned apartment in the warehouse district. Marcus had a key. Marcus had always had keys to places. That was their friendship. Marcus knew people. Marcus made connections. Marcus opened doors. Marcus entered holding 2 paper cups of coffee. His face was kind and concerned. He handed 1 cup to Elias and sat on a wooden crate opposite him. "You look like hell, El. What did you find?" Marcus asked. Elias showed him the papers. He pointed to Elena Vance's name, to the security firm letterhead, to the checks signed by Sarah. "She was working for Sarah," Elias said, his voice shaking. "The whole documentary was a setup to get me to confess to things I didn't do for the custody hearing. But there is no custody hearing. There's no child, it's all—" "Actually," Marcus said, setting his coffee down on the crate beside him, "the documentary was my idea. Sarah just funded it." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a high-end digital recorder, a Zoom H1N. He pressed a button and the red light went out. The LCD screen showed, "File 082 saved." Elias stared at the recorder. He looked at the coffee in his hand, still warm but getting colder. He looked at Marcus's wrist and noticed the watch there. A Rolex Submariner, gold and silver, the kind of watch that cost more than Elias made in a year. "You were my best man, Marcus," Elias said. The words came out as a whisper. "I know," Marcus said. He stood up and moved toward the door. He pulled out a radio, a 2-way radio, professional grade. 2 figures appeared in the doorway behind him, men in suits, solid, expressionless, the kind of men who existed for a single purpose. "Betrayal isn't about hate, El," Marcus said. "It's about a better offer." Elias ran. He sprinted across the rooftops of the warehouse district, his dress shoes slipping on wet gravel. Behind him, footsteps. At least 2 people, maybe more. He didn't look back. He leapt over a gap to the next building, his hands clawing at the ledge on the far side. His fingers found purchase. He pulled himself up, gravel scratching his palms, drawing blood that mixed with the rainwater running down his arms. A henchman caught up. The man grabbed Elias's leg as Elias tried to climb a fire escape ladder. Elias kicked backward with his heavy boot, striking the man's throat. The man's hands released. He made no sound as he fell backward into the darkness below. Another henchman cornered Elias near a large ventilation fan. He swung a heavy chain. The chain wrapped around Elias's arm, the cold metal biting into his skin. Sparks flew as the chain hit the metal fan housing. Elias pulled the chain, dragging the henchman toward the spinning blades. The man let go in a panic. Elias punched him twice, left hook, right cross. The man's head snapped from side to side. Elias reached the edge of the roof. There was no other building nearby. Just a 4-story drop to an alley filled with trash bags and metal containers. The fall would break his legs at minimum. He looked back. Marcus was standing on the previous roof, watching him through binoculars. "Nowhere left to run," Elias said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. He backed up and ran forward, his body arcing against the black sky. He landed in a dumpster filled with construction debris. His ribs exploded with pain. Something sharp, a piece of rebar or broken metal, cut through his shoulder, entering cleanly and exiting through the blade. He lay there in the trash, bleeding, listening to sirens approaching. When the ambulance arrived, he was unconscious. They took him to county hospital and admitted him to emergency, where they stabilized him but didn't ask many questions. There was a gunshot wound. There were contusions consistent with blunt force trauma. There were lacerations of unknown origin. But Elias had no insurance to speak of, and the ER was full. So after they stitched him up and wrapped his ribs, they transferred him to the 4th floor for overnight observation. At 3 a.m., Elias woke up and found himself moving. He didn't know how long he'd been unconscious. Elias sat on the floor beside Sarah's bed. He understood now. The checks weren't signed by Sarah. They were forged by Marcus using her power of attorney. Marcus had been draining her estate for 2 years, while blaming it on protecting her from Elias. Elias, the villain. Elias, the unstable ex-husband who'd driven her to this. They'd used his broken heart as a smokescreen. Elena Vance walked into the room at 3:07 a.m. She wasn't holding a camera. She was holding a silenced pistol, a Walther PPK, compact and efficient. "Marcus wanted you to die a broken man, Elias," she said. She wasn't the interviewer anymore. She was something else entirely. "But I think a dead one is safer." She fired. The silenced thwip hit the IV stand next to Elias's head. The plastic bag of saline shattered. Water sprayed everywhere, hot droplets on his face. Elias threw the plastic bag of Sarah's belongings at Elena's face and dove for her legs. He hit the floor hard, sliding through the spilled saline. His hands clawed at her ankles. Elena kicked Elias in the face with her pointed heel. Blood spurted from his lip. She aimed the gun downward at his head. Her finger began to squeeze the trigger. "Goodbye, Elias," she whispered. Elias grabbed a metal tray of surgical instruments from the bedside table and slapped it against Elena's gun hand. The gun fired into the floor. He then stabbed a pair of surgical scissors into her thigh. The blue scissors handle protruded from her black jeans. Elena screamed, a sound of pure animal pain, and fell back, clutching her leg. Elias grabbed the gun. He tried to fire, but it was jammed. The firing pin was bent. He heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. Marcus's voice shouted orders to guards. A red lockdown light began to flash on the door. Elias was trapped on the 4th floor, wounded and out of ammo. He pressed himself against the corner of the room and waited, his breathing shallow, his mind working through the limited options. He remembered the blueprints he'd been scrolling through in the warehouse studio. He remembered the layout of this building. He'd designed buildings like this. He knew where the structural weak points were. He knew where the laundry chute emptied. He ignored the locked door and kicked open the small wooden door of the laundry chute in the corner of the room. The wood splintered easily. Inside was a dark, vertical shaft, extending down into the building's guts. He grabbed a bundle of bloody sheets from a bin on the floor and wrapped them around his arms for protection. Then he slid into the chute, his body accelerating as gravity took hold. The fall seemed endless. He passed the 3rd floor opening, the 2nd floor opening, and then he hit a pile of damp towels in the basement with a sound like a drum being struck. He rolled out of the bin, dripping with water and detergent. He was in the boiler room. Steam pipes crisscrossed the ceiling. The heat was immense. He found the main electrical panel. He pulled a lever labeled Main Power. The building plunged into darkness. The emergency lights didn't kick in immediately, and in those seconds of pure black, Elias moved. He exited the basement and found the loading dock. A delivery truck, a white Ford, was idling, its engine running, waiting for something. A driver sat in the cab, checking his phone. Elias climbed into the back and hid among the clean linen carts. He pulled the doors shut and felt the truck move beneath him, driving away from the hospital and into the fog-covered streets. At 5:30 a.m., Elias used the key he'd taken from Marcus's pocket, a key to Marcus's penthouse apartment, to enter the building. The elevator rose in silence. The hallway was empty. Marcus was packing a carbon fiber suitcase. Cash stacks were piled on the bed. His Rolex was on top of the pile. He stopped when he saw Elias standing in the balcony doorway, silhouetted by the rising sun. The sky behind Elias was burning orange and purple. "You should be dead or in a cell, El," Marcus said. His voice shook. Elias held up the Zoom H1N recorder. He pressed play. Marcus's own voice came out of the speaker, crystal clear. "Actually, Elias, the documentary was my idea. Sarah just funded it." Elias tossed the recorder onto the marble floor. It skid to Marcus's feet. Then Elias showed his phone. The screen displayed live streaming, 12,000 viewers. The documentary crew's own followers were watching. "You wanted a documentary, Marcus?" Elias said. His voice was steady now. Quiet. Final. "Here's the final scene." Police sirens wailed below. Marcus looked out the window to see black and white swarming the entrance. He sank onto his designer sofa, his head in his hands. Elias walked to the bar and poured 2 fingers of expensive scotch. He didn't drink it. He poured it over the cash in Marcus's suitcase, watching the amber liquid soak the $100 bills. Then he walked out the front door, leaving the elevator open for the police. 1 week later, Elias sat by Sarah's hospital bed in a room filled with morning sunlight. He was wearing a clean white shirt. His bruises were fading. He was holding her hand, his fingers gently rubbing her knuckles, the small bones moving beneath the paper-thin skin. "I thought I lost the ability to trust," he said softly. "But I was just looking at the wrong people." He placed a small object on her nightstand. It was the silver ring that had sat on his right pinky finger for so long that his skin was marked with the band's outline. He didn't put it back on. He left it there next to a vase of yellow tulips, where the light could catch it. Sarah's eyelids flickered. Her index finger twitched against Elias's palm. It was the first sign of movement in 2 years. The first signal that something inside her was still working, still trying, still reaching. Elias leaned in close. He saw her eyes open, just a crack at first. She wasn't looking at him with malice. She was looking at him with recognition. Recognition that he was there, that he was real, that he hadn't abandoned her. "I'm here," Elias said. His voice was thick with tears. "For real this time." He looked at the door. A woman stood there. A real interviewer from a real news network, not Elena Vance, not a film crew with hidden agendas, but a genuine journalist with a genuine camera. He nodded at her. He wasn't afraid of the camera anymore. He stood up and straightened his posture, pulling his shoulders back, lifting his chin. He was ready to tell the truth about what had happened to him and to Sarah. "Start the recording," he said. "I'm ready."